Right, the COVID-19 pandemic is threatening to undo the gains the world has made on gender equality over the past 25 years. These are the words there of Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who recently spoke at the Sustainable Development Goals Summit. And of course, you'll know world leaders gathered together for the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And while the world grapples with the economic devastation caused by COVID-19, we've got to ask the question, is equality, and more specifically, are women still at the top of the agenda? She joins us now from New York City. Dr. Mlambo-Ngcuka, welcome to 702 Breakfast. COVID-19 is unlike anything any of us have lived through in our lives.
No, absolutely. Our generation has never seen anything like this, and its impact on women is devastating, and of course, it's devastating to society in general. But there's never a gender-neutral pandemic, and COVID is not different. We learned from Ebola that when you have a pandemic of that nature, women are not only affected by the disease, they are affected by the underlying inequalities that are exacerbated, the handling of the response to the management of the disease. And that would include the fact that many women have no savings. So if they suddenly have their lives disrupted, they are unable to survive for a long time. In all pandemics, violence against women increase. We've seen it in this case. And also because women are in the informal sector, their capacity to spring back to action after the pandemic is often much harder. And in Africa in particular, where more than 70% of women are in the informal sector, it is usually very devastating.
And the burden to carry the responsibilities for the families is often disproportionately on women's shoulders. So there's no question that this pandemic will have deepened already existing inequalities.
Yeah. In fact, unpaid care in families in all countries of the world, including developed countries, still falls again disproportionately on the shoulders of the women. Economies do not count the contribution of women, which comes from taking care of families. So there's invisible labor that women provide to society that is unpaid for. In cases where it is a health pandemic and people need to be cared for, women and girls are caregivers in families. In the case of the pandemic where hospitals were overwhelmed, many sick people, those who were affected by the disease and those who couldn't access healthcare facilities with other conditions, who had to stay at home, were cared for by women. So again, the burden of care has been one of the most, it was one of the difficulties that women have faced in this time. And as a result, a silver line sometimes in a dark cloud. There are many countries now, you might have heard in the General Assembly, who are talking about the need of recognizing and redistributing the burden of care from women, because countries who have done that already, who did that before COVID, have seen more women entering the labor market because their infrastructure for the care system is much more attuned to assisting women, especially young mothers, to go to work.
So the pandemic has obviously set many countries back. How do we accelerate closing this gap? What can we do now that we're here?
It's important, Bongani, that we try not to waste a good crisis, so to say, because every crisis offers us opportunities. In this particular crisis, when it comes to gender-based violence, in the countries that we have worked in, including South Africa, collaborating with government and other service providers to see the readiness of the country to deal with gender-based violence, we have up-to-date information about what is missing in the infrastructure and the services that are needed for women. So where there's resources and stronger advocacy, political will, we know exactly what we can do, and that we have been able to do in most of the countries of the world. Secondly, on digital infrastructure. I think if you strip me of everything else, I'm just a teacher. I love education because I also think that is the closest thing to the silver bullet when we are addressing women's issues. And I have been advocating the need for digital infrastructure in our schools. I don't know how many speeches I've made. COVID, one day, everybody understood the message and how important that is. And I think that too offers us an opportunity to close the digital divide. And in the digital divide, there's also a digital divide gender gap. And that too, we have details, and we need to use this opportunity to close it, and close it fast.
I want to focus on South Africa specifically because you would obviously have had, a lot more of experience in dealing with our challenges. There's the digital divide, there's the economic gap, but there's also the horrible problem of femicide, specifically when we talk about gender-based violence. And one of the things, of course, that we've seen during this crisis is how many women and children have been locked in closed spaces with the perpetrators of violence against them. And in some cases, the consequences have been horrific.
Yeah. So in South Africa specifically, digital divide, certainly we have no excuse now not to address it adequately. Secondly, on femicide and gender-based violence in general, including domestic violence, we know in South Africa now that our police and our responses cannot really are not there on time. That leaves many women vulnerable. While police and law enforcement cannot be everywhere, every time, we need to cultivate collaboration with communities. There was a time in South Africa where we used to have street committees, where each other's keeper at that time. The femicide and the violence against women in South Africa is so deep that we actually need a whole society approach.
But with respect though, I would put it to you that those street committees are around mobilizing against an external threat. The people behind a lot of the gender-based violence are in our homes. These are the people who would be part of those committees in the past. And we've had summits, we've had discussions, we've had campaigns, and yet it just seems to, in fact, be getting worse. I mean, you mentioned the issue of political will. Is there political will to deal with this?
I think it's unequal, because in countries where we've seen move, the political will has been wholesome, if you like. You have strength in the leadership at the highest. You have your prosecution authority. You have your police at local level. You have the whole system works together. And there aren't many countries that have been able to turn this around. But in those rare pockets where we are seeing this, that collaboration has been tight. So it would be from presidents to mayors to councillors to especially your local councillors. And of course, you need the women's movement to be strong.
So you were once a heartbeat away from the presidency. Two questions for you. Is this president doing enough? And secondly, if you were in charge, what would you be doing differently?
You know, is this president doing enough? I mean, he is definitely saying the right things, and I really believe that he means it, but he actually needs a team that can work with him to implement. And the team everywhere in law enforcement and in the social work system, in making cases reach their conclusion. I mean, the fact that we still do not see as many people going to jail for femicide, when we know the numbers are so high, that does not make perpetrators feel they have something to fear. So I think that he can actually only go so much. He needs the system to hold together and work with him. I think we're struggling to help the system to work together everywhere. And in part, corruption contributes towards the level of complacence that we actually see. The disappearance of dockets, for instance, and the fact that people are not held accountable.
So what would you differently if you were in charge? What would you differently?
You know, I suppose because maybe I am a woman, I would probably be going there myself. Because I think that in some ways, there is nothing for me at this point in time when it comes into protecting the rights of women that is more important to win than gender-based violence, because it is the most dehumanizing form of discrimination against women, which actually produces corpses. It is also the form of violation against women's human rights that is highly tolerated in South Africa and in most cultures of the world. So I think you really have to go there. You almost have to go to court yourself sometimes. You actually...
As a former senior member of government in South Africa, you were part of shaping this new country in the 90s, especially. You were a deputy minister, you became a minister, you were deputy president. There was this sense of promise, right? No doubt in the corridors of the UN, people will reflect on what South Africa achieved. And yet, if you look at issues like corruption, if you look at, let's call it a crisis of governance in South Africa, it seems we've made some reversals.
Yeah, well, certainly you just have to listen to the Zondo Commission just to know how much we lost our way in South Africa. We are facing challenges that have become, if you like, decentralized, in that in almost every part of the public service, we have these problems. I don't want to trivialize these problems and say it is easy, but I also think that it's important that people of goodwill and those who believe in what we are meant to do as public servants really need to stand up and be counted. This is the time to be a whistleblower. We really cannot be bystanders because it will take the majority of people who stand up for us to take a new course. And of course, people being brought to book, that too is part of the package.
What do you say?
And also, can I just go back to the issue of women? If also I was in government, I really would have pushed for more resources to to support our intervention as well as to support civil society directly. Because those institutions have taken a beating and COVID has made it worse. And we need it. And I think in South Africa, we know what it is like to work in a collaborative manner with civil society. And we need them to be supported as much as possible. So I would have that as a critical component of my response.
What do you say to people who ask you internationally, what's gone wrong with South Africa? Where did you lose it? What's your response?
Sometimes I've had to turn the other way and take a short left at the height of the challenges that we're faced, which now have all come to a head. And I mean, we're having a perfect storm with the pandemic plus all these underlying challenges. You know, actually, because when you are in the United Nations, you are also amongst many countries that are struggling. We don't stand up in that way. But because we know we can be better than that, we absolutely have no reason to be where we are as South Africa. I think we are one country in the world who have people that are admired and respected in the United Nations for integrity and leadership than many other countries in the world. Mandela is the only former president in the United Nations who has a Mandela Day that is designated by the UN. Bishop Tutu has left a legacy in the UN that is unparalleled. A number of South African women participate in different shape and form in the different UN entities. So we are not short of role models and people to look up to. So yes, many countries have problems, but actually it's a matter of to whom so much has been given, much more is expected. So we really cannot, just accept that that's the way the world is in our.
Final question to you. How do we meet those expectations? You spoke about street committees referring to the struggle days. How do citizens become active in their own destiny and not leaving it up to the politicians who may or may not fail them? How do we get that sense of vukuzenzele back into an active citizenry in South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, when we are talking, for instance, about in particular gender-based violence and femicide, men have to have a talk amongst themselves. I think that we do not have to fix and delegate more to women on this issue, because I think women have done everything that they possibly can. We just have too few men who are in the forefront and who are leading on these issues. I actually think an engagement man to man is one of the pieces that is still missing. It's encouraging now that we're seeing in the churches that the church leaders, abafundisi, are taking the issue very seriously, but we actually need a male feminist movement that makes this a priority. You know, the same anger you and I felt against white domination is the anger that women feel against the way men treat women. So if you could think about that scenario as a man and use that energy to want change that you had when you wanted to defeat apartheid, you probably would have a way of comprehending what women are going through.
Dr. Mlambo-Ngcuka, it's a pleasure to chat to you. I wish you the best of luck in your work in New York, representing South Africa, continuing to fly our flag high. And let's hope that at whatever point you return permanently back home, there'll be something for you to look forward to when you come back. Thank you so much for your time.
702.
More than a radio station.
Let's walk the talk.